Have you ever just stopped and wondered who is actually writing the rules we all live by every single day? I mean, who really shapes the laws, the prices at the store, and the regulations that govern our daily lives? Do the policies rolled out by the government truly reflect what's best for the public, or are there, invisible hands kind of steering the wheel? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly absolutely crucial tension at the heart of modern democracies. We are looking at the constant push and pull between immense corporate power and the public interest. It's this incredibly complex dance between money, access, and the laws we all have to abide by. Here's how we're going to break this down today. First, the radio tape scandal. 2, the mechanisms of corporate influence. 3, the threat to public interest. 4, pushing back with drug pricing. And 5, reforming the policymaking framework. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the radio tape scandal, unveiling the hidden network. 5,851. That is the staggering number of phone conversations recorded by the Indian Income Tax Department, over 300 days of wiretapping. Now, they were originally just investigating potential tax evasion and restricted financial practices, but what they actually uncovered was an entirely different kind of bombshell. These recordings eventually became known as the radio tapes, and they captured a seriously powerful network in action. At the center of it all was a lobbyist named Neera Radia, who ran a public relations firm called Vaishnavi Communications. And the tapes revealed her in deep, behind-the-scenes conversations with senior politicians, prominent journalists, and top industrialists. The audio literally captured attempts to broker deals and leverage media connections to influence major government decisions, the most notable one, lobbying to influence who would actually be appointed as the Union IT and Communications Minister. But here's a twist that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a corporate thriller. These explosive tapes weren't initially released to the public by the government or, some heroic whistleblower. According to an investigative journalist who received them, the tapes were actually leaked to the media by a source ensconced inside a rival lobbying organization. Yeah, simply to settle internal scores and rivalries. Moving right along to Section 2, Mechanisms of Corporate Influence, the Academic Framework. So to really understand how this works structurally, we're looking at a paper from the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research that analyzes transparency gaps in India's policymaking framework. It points out that after India transitioned to a market-oriented economy in 1991, the cooperation between the state and the private sector just completely surged. And while that definitely brought in investment and efficiency, it also placed corporations at the absolute center of governance. And researchers point out a really fundamental conflict here. Think about it. On one side, you've got corporate entities that are fundamentally driven by economic goals and profit maximization. They want to make money. On the other side, the public interest requires things like economic justice, environmental sustainability, and social equity. The catch is that corporations inherently have massive financial resources, technical knowledge, and institutional networks that ordinary citizens simply do not possess. So the paper breaks it down into 4 main ways corporations kind of tip the scales. First is political funding, where a lack of disclosure can easily lead to quiet, quid pro quo deals. Second is informal lobbying. This is a big one because India actually lacks a comprehensive legal system governing lobbying, so a lot of it happens in the shadows. Third, we have public-private partnerships. These are totally necessary for infrastructure, but they often involve intricate contracts that lack real transparency. And fourth is regulatory capture. That's when revolving door employment and political interference actually cause regulators to favor the exact industries they're supposed to be overseeing. Which brings us to Section 3, the threat to public interest when influence goes unchecked. So what actually happens when influence goes unchecked? Well, according to the analysis, the ripple effects are pretty severe. When policy is captured, the rules are suddenly tilted to favor large corporations, which actively stifles small businesses and increases economic inequality. The research highlights that this can also drive serious environmental and social damage. For instance, if you soften regulations in sectors like mining or infrastructure just to favor economic interests, it can literally lead to environmental destruction and the displacement of local residents. Ultimately, it sacrifices long-term equitable development for short-term profit. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, wait, don't we have transparency laws to stop this kind of thing? Well, even with tools like the Right to Information Act of 2005, the paper notes that true transparency in policymaking is often an illusion. Draft policies and stakeholder consultations are rarely disclosed to the public. And as this quote highlights, Even when citizens try to access agreements made with corporate entities, they're very often blocked by strict confidentiality clauses.
Let's pivot a bit with Section 4, pushing back, drug pricing, regulating for the people.
To see how the government can actively step in and push back, we're going to look at the pharmaceutical industry and something called the Drug Price Control Order, or DPCO. Originating under the Essential Commodities Act of 1955, the DPCO is this incredibly powerful tool used by the government. Its goal? To ensure that life-saving essential medications remain affordable and accessible to the masses, rather than letting corporate pricing dictate public health. The history of this regulation is actually a really fascinating map of this push and pull of power over the decades. Back in 1979, 347 drugs were under price control. But then, through the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, that number plummeted, hitting a low of just around 32 drugs in 2002. That was a period of intense deregulation. But then, recognizing the public need, the government clamped back down. The DPCO of 2013 brought 348 drugs back under control, and by 2019, that number surged to an incredible 860 regulated drugs. And this isn't just abstract policy, right? This literally hits your wallet, because the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority enforces the DPCO. The exact capped retail price for a basic paracetamol and caffeine tablet was fixed at just 2 rupees and 88 paise. Another vital pill, a combination of rosuvastatin, aspirin, and clopidogrel, is capped at 13 rupees and 91 paise. Researchers point out that this is direct, tangible protection of the public interest against runaway profit margins. But, regulation is always a delicate balancing act. The NPPA isn't just there to slash prices to zero. They have to ensure that essential drugs don't just completely disappear from pharmacy shelves because they're suddenly no longer profitable to manufacture. That's actually why, recently, the NPPA allowed a highly unusual 50% price hike for 9 scheduled formulations, including basics like ibuprofen and ranitidine. It was a calculated move to make sure manufacturers kept producing these vital drugs for the public health program. Finally, let's look at Section 5, reforming the policymaking framework, the path forward. So, how do we fix the broader structural gaps? The paper lays out a really clear, multidimensional reform model. First and foremost, India desperately needs a statutory framework for lobbying. We have to bring it out of the shadows. Lobbyists must be required to register and disclose their spending and their relationships with policymakers. We also need mandated absolute disclosure of all corporate political funding to prevent those quiet quid pro quo arrangements. Furthermore, we've got to empower independent audit entities with real teeth to monitor these interactions. And finally, the policymaking process itself needs to proactively publish draft policies and actively invite civil society and marginalized groups to the table. And I think that brings us to the absolute core of the issue. Corporate investment and efficiency are undeniably vital for a growing modern economy, right? We need businesses to thrive. But as the radiotape showed us, and as academic research proves, when influence operates in the dark, the public pays the price. So, I leave you with this to consider. As we look to the future, how can our democracies strike the ultimate balance, harnessing the power of corporate investment while fiercely protecting the rules, the regulations, and the greater good that we all live by?